Before Paper Mario became obsessed with stickers and staplers, he embarked on an RPG adventure that has received generations worth of praise. But is this praise deserved? Let's dive in and talk about everything The Thousand Year Door. I'm talking the good, the bad, and the Rawk Hawk. Honestly, this game is not everything I remembered it to be, and I don't know if that's necessarily a bad thing. Spoilers ahead, obviously. But for those of you that have never journeyed to Rogueport before, let's get on the same page. Mario needs to get 7 crystal stars to stop the end of the world. This is broken up into chapters. In each chapter, you go to a giant door that tells you where you need to go next. Then a shriveled old Goomba with Doc Brown's hair tells you where it is. But you can't get there without doing a tedious chase down thing. So you go and you do the tedious chase down. My personal favorite tedious side quest is when you break an old woman's glasses and she won't let you go to the west side of town until you buy her new ones. You can then finally go to the new main area where you participate in some cannon fodder battles. Then you find a new town which laces to a specific plot, and then you go to a dungeon-esque area where the star is, and go through hijinks to get that star. Then you fade to black, only for you to be controlling Princess Peach, who is on the moon teaching a robot how to love. Then you take control of Bowser, who's chasing down crystal stars very poorly and is basically just revisiting places Mario has been, so that you can go, hey, I remember that place. So now that we have the proper high-level picture of what we're going to be doing, I'm just going to start chewing through my list of topics that I wanted to talk about with this game. And I think to start our conversation, we need to start with the biggest strength of this game, which is the battling system. Not the battles themselves, but the system around battling. This action command system of keeping yourself engaged while you're doing the same repetitive actions over and over and over again is good. Every single time you get the stylish hammer command, you do feel like you've accomplished something, and it's always nice to see that you're doing a lot of damage by remembering to use certain inputs. However, that does not take away from the main problem with this entire system, and that is that the battles are just way too easy. I don't know if this is a weakness of the badge system making Mario too strong, or that all of the encounters are just designed for younger people to be able to beat them. This is definitely one of like baby's first RPGs in my opinion, and the battling reflects that, which is a shame because if there was like a hard mode that just made it so that the enemies hit a bit harder, that made it so that you'd actually have to think a little bit more about where you were going to be putting your skill points, I think that the game could take very interesting turns. But my experience playing this game was just maxing out Mario's power, maxing out Mario's flower points, and just spamming special moves, clearing through just wave after wave of enemies like they were just cannon fodder. It's a damn shame because when I think of this game, I put it in the same league as like a Mario and Luigi RPG, and I recently played through Mario and Luigi Superstar Saga. And that action command system holds up a lot better because the fights just last longer. Mario and Luigi need to take hits in that game, or at the very least mitigate damage coming in, which means you can rationalize putting points into something like health where you actually do need to survive. Whereas in this game, it's just flower points and blast. But honestly, I'm not going to rag on this too much. I do see this as a game that is supposed to be a gateway into the RPG genre as a whole. So if the battles are a little bit easier, that's fine. Especially near the end of the game, the final boss and the final sequence leading up to that final boss has the most engaging battles in the game. And I made a point of not grinding a single point of experience throughout the entire game. So like it seems to keep you on a really good curve. The core of this game is this is like just a really good treadmill game. I had one Joy-Con in each hand and I was just walking on the treadmill, and that's where I did the bulk of this playthrough. And I think that's where it really shines. It's just engaging enough to make it so that you aren't worried about the pain in your feet, but it's not so engaging that you're constantly thinking 4 moves ahead. Now for the story is honestly really charming. It's this weird Dungeons and Dragons-esque story that usually comes out by finding 7 different MacGuffins scattered about the world, but honestly, I'm probably gonna steal a few chapters for my Dungeons and Dragons campaign. Like just at a glance, listen to each elevator pitch for each of these chapters, okay? Chapter 1, a town is being terrorized by a dragon, and this dragon is just straight up eating people and bringing them to their castle. So Mario has to go and beat up the dragon, which leads to the first crystal star, which hints to the plot at large, but you're mostly just going there to beat dragon. Then in chapter 2, the main antagonistic force takes over a giant tree, and you use the help of the locals to sneak into this tree and then lead an army of 100 of them against their arch rivals in order to not only kick out the mosquitoes, but to also kick out the main antagonistic force. It's a great little introduction to the overarching bad guy, and it's just kind of a laugh watching 100 little things get blown around the screen as you go and accomplish your miscellaneous tasks. In chapter 3, Mario becomes a pit fighter because he believes that the crystal star is attached to the championship belt because it honestly looks like it is. But obviously the belt is just a fake, and the real crystal star is being used to siphon energy out of the top fighters. You know, because the tournament organizer is a little bit of a loony bin. Chapter 4, Mario quite literally loses his entire identity to a doppelganger, and then finds a new friend who helps him get his identity back. Chapter 5, you go sailing and get shipwrecked on an island that you have to go and beat an ancient evil force in order to use their ghost ship to leave the island. And then in Chapter 6, you're going on a nice poshy cruise in order to solve a murder mystery that doesn't really work out very well. And then you eventually just go and visit a museum to go and get a secretly hidden crystal star. And then in Chapter 7, you have to go and fight the main bad guys, who are honestly not really the most present throughout most of this game, but you go to their base on the moon to try and rescue the princess and get the last crystal star. But don't worry, the enemies are one step ahead of you, because in the final chapter, you have to go behind the giant door that you've been trying to get these crystal stars to stop big malevolent force throughout the entire game. And so you walk through and then you beat the big bad. Well, then the big bad isn't really the big bad. The big bad was trying to summon a world-ending force that is actually just a big shadow person. So you go and beat the shadow person, the real big bad, and then the game ends. And if you're telling me that each one of those individually doesn't sound like just a hilarious D&D plot hook, you are wrong, and I will prove you wrong when I go and do this with my table. But there are parts of this game that just shouldn't be a video game. Namely, this game suffers very hard from walk back syndrome, which is you just trace through the same paths over and over again. Chapters 3, 5, and 6 are the most guilty of this. In Chapter 3, you're a pit fighter, and that makes sense. You're going to be doing a lot of pit fights. But my god, in order to activate each new fight, you have to go up to a console and call for the fight. When you call for the fight, a bodyguard comes in and then escorts you to the arena, where you then do a trivial encounter, and you have to do that at least 20 times in order to get to the actual final boss fight of this area. Chapter 5 and 6 are even worse than that, because in Chapter 5, you're on this deserted island. It's rather small. So in order to make it feel bigger, they just get you to walk down the same channel back and forth about 30 different times. And what's sad is they made this easier by adding a giant spring on the ground so that you can cut out a portion of that walk, but it was still incredibly tedious. But if all of that sounds bad, it all pales in comparison to the pain I felt in my soul during Chapter 6. In Chapter 6, while you're doing the murder mystery, you're honestly just a passerby watching the story unfold. At no point do you take an active interest in the story, because you're just going from NPC to NPC, getting different dialogue options to tell you which NPC to go talk to next. And the sequence just lasts way too long. And that's the thing, this game doesn't let you skip dialogue very easily. You have to watch it all come onto the screen. So that means you're not going through dialogue at a very quick pace. Which means that in some instances, like when one Pianta needs to tell the other Pianta that he loves them 100 times, you have to press through that 100 times. That's 100 different inputs. And my jaw hit the floor, because I thought for sure when we got to like 20 it would make Mario fall asleep like he does when we listen to Luigi's stories, but no, we had to press that button 100 different times. It was ridiculous. And I can't even say that that was the only time that something really off base like that happens, because you do it about 3 or 4 different times throughout the game. Like you're saying I love you, you're stomping on a bomb's head, and each time you're just like, when will this be over? And they're all very necessary to get the story to progress. It's wild. And if all of that wasn't enough, in between each chapter when you control Bowser and Peach, it just hasn't aged well. Between Peach being abducted and teaching the robot to love, I actually think that that is fine. It's rather weird having Peach need to take a shower each time, but whatever, they have to go and check the right boxes, I guess. But it comes back down to what I was just talking about. The text is annoying to go through, and the Peach part in particular is just all exposition and story text. And it always ends with the supercomputer that she's teaching how to love just sending Mario an email in order for you, Mario, to have the context that you, the player, have just gathered. But the Bowser sections, in my opinion, I think have aged the worst, because Bowser doesn't control well, and he's basically just going through platforming sections that look vaguely like classic Mario levels. But he eats meat, gets super big, and just blows fire on things. But he controls really freaking poorly. So at no point are you feeling like, oh man, this feels really good to play, I wish this was longer. You actually feel like you want it to be over the moment that it starts. But I don't want it to come across like I hate this game. This game is good, it is just fine. And I think especially the final section from like invading the moon base into the final dungeon, that is when this game is at its peak. You are in consistently challenging encounters where you are having to think about your resources rationally. If you went and used all of your flower points on like the first encounters in the room, you wouldn't have enough bandwidth to get to the next restore point without running into some trouble. So you actually had to use your resources rationally, and that was a weird change of pace from being a glass cannon run through the entire rest of the game. The end of the game, the entire Shadow Temple, is blissfully good. And especially when you're able to contrast that against how bad Chapter 6 was. So I guess to summarize, the Thousand Year Door is a relic of its time that has been kept pure and true to form in the Switch remake. And unfortunately, the amazing combat design of this game is underutilized because of the encounters that just do not push the player to think further ahead than kill enemy fast and now. The story is just good enough to make you keep playing, but it isn't anything revolutionary or something to write home about, and for me in particular, it was just like a constant IV drip, because I did remember most of the game's major story beats going through. The Thousand Year Door remake took me 17 hours to complete. I did not 100% this game because the side quests were tedious at best. And if you wanted to do any of the side quests, the one who is sent by question mark is the one that gets you the extra companion. I am definitely going to hold on to this game because I think it would be a great gateway RPG for my future children to play. And overall, if I had to rate it, I'd say this game is about a 7 out of 10. Thanks for watching, subscribe for more, and I'll see you next time.